Ladies and gentlemen, I am here to simply announce that we have another participant for as long as we can sustain his presence in our midst. We're very honored to have with us the City Council President of the City of Los Angeles, Councilman Eric Garcetti. Now, Eric was a Rhodes Scholar at the University of Oxford, where I was the rabbi, and we were very good friends. He actually was there after Mayor Booker was a Rhodes Scholar.
No, same time.
Exact same time?
Yeah, he was a year ahead. Too
many drugs, Shmuley.
Okay.
That's right.
It's not drugs, Cory. It's called whiskey. It comes in a bottle. So these are brief introductions. I think we have more formal introductions, but I'm conscious of the fact that Councilman Garcetti, who just recently got married, has a wife waiting.
Once at the last. To a Rhodes Scholar who is smarter than him, right. Much better looking than he is, and much nicer too.
If I get home on time.
If you get home on time,
okay.
Who will divorce him.
But the point is that we actually want him and his wife to be happy together. And I stand for marital bliss. So we don't want to delay Eric. So these are just very brief introductions. This is a special event. This is a unique group of people that I'm amazed that we were able to get together on such short notice. It really was only about 10 days ago that Mayor Cory Booker of Newark agreed to give of his exceptionally pressed time on his West Coast visit to do a public forum here, and it really is a privilege. Let me just tell you, Cory is one of the most sought-after speakers in the United States today. He's one of America's most electrifying young politicians. He's a man who has brought enormous change to the city of Newark, the largest city in the state where I live in New Jersey. Thank you. And he didn't have to give me a 50 because he could have given me a 5. And he is much bigger than me. But Mayor Booker is
not ego proportion. We're talking about physical size. But
Mayor Booker, I'm very, very grateful that he has given us of his time. This is going to be a very interesting conversation. And just very briefly, because now I see Rabbi Seidler-Feller. When I was the rabbi at Oxford University from 1988 to 1999, I created an organization of Oxford students comprised of Jewish, non-Jewish, black, white, people of every ethnicity, every religious persuasion, every political persuasion. We created an organization of students who believed in the power of change, the power to bring spiritual values, to actually inspire the world and inspire people to make better choices about their lives. And I knew that we had a playground of such fascinating young minds from around the world who would later go on to do great things. And of all the students that I had the great pleasure of working with and serving as rabbi to, really none have distinguished themselves as quickly in the field of American politics as Mayor Booker of Newark, New Jersey, ranked by many as truly one of the 2 or 3 most successful mayors in the country today, and a man who has inspired tens of millions of people throughout the nation due to his very inclusive vision and his very inspirational message. Cory only sees the good in people, he only sees the good in the nation, and you'll hear a lot of that today.
With the exception of Shmuley Boteach.
Because with me, he doesn't have to find it. It's so readily apparent.
Self-evident.
Yeah. And then to see the heights to which Councilman Garcetti has risen here in Los Angeles to be such a young city council president, second to the mayor in running this incredible metropolis that is Los Angeles. So we're very privileged to be here. And of course, Rob Eshman is the editor-in-chief of the Jewish Journal, second largest Jewish publication. Second largest Jewish publication in the entire United States, certainly the largest west of the Mississippi. I don't know if you guys are gaining on the Jewish Week in New York.
They're nothing. Jewish what? What's New York? New what?
But Rob has brought a very eclectic approach to Jewish journalism. And although I live in the great state of New Jersey, I do read the Jewish Journal online every week, and I write for them as well. And I want to thank everyone. But more than anyone else, we want to thank Rabbi Chaim Seidler-Feller for allowing us to be here this evening. And as I said, due to the pressing nature both of Mayor Booker's schedule, and I'm amazed that he's standing on his feet given what he's been through the past few days, and Councilman Garcetti's wife is waiting at home. I got all the time in the world. I'm going to hang out with you guys for like a week. We're going to try to get through introductions very quickly and get started.
I'm sure that all of you, all that you wanted this evening is to have another rabbi talk to you tonight. So I prepared a speech. You see, they're just the follow-up. I'm really pleased to be able to host, that we can host this panel this evening. And I just wanted you to take a look around the building when you walk here at Hillel and take note of the fact that this is a vital center for Jewish life at UCLA. And it is a place where students of all backgrounds meet. It's a place where students are inspired not only to involve themselves intensively in Jewish life, but in community service. One story, for the last 10 years, we've been sending students on an alternative spring break project. For a week, they've gone to El Salvador, to Mexico. They've been rebuilding New Orleans. They've been up north in California. They've been working in the inner city in Los Angeles. I call these projects Torah in action, because all Jewish students learn about social justice, but they don't do it. So this really makes it happen. It's true that these are the principles that we live with. So because our student leaders are involved in campus, they brought the notion of alternative spring break trips to UCLA. So that's really an achievement, that a small little community can have an impact on a large campus. And one can understand that students who take a week off during the spring, have a vacation, rebuild communities around the country and around the world. That's really, I think that's to the credit of the students and to the ideals that we try to embody. So I'd like you to note the Hillel when you leave. There's some brochures downstairs. You know, we're one among many organizations today that need support. If you feel so inclined, please do so. And come to me, call me. I'd love to meet you. I want to leave with one more word, because tonight's panel is discussing beyond tolerance. So I want to quote a verse from Scripture. The verse is from, maybe someone's going to quote it later or was planning on it. I'm sorry, I'm the first one up here. The verse is from Micah. Micah chapter 4, verse 5. Micah's quoting Isaiah. So everyone knows the verse in Isaiah, right? About beating swords into plowshares. You know that. But that's not enough for Micah. He does want peace, but peace isn't enough. He says, though all the peoples walk each in the names of its gods, this is the end of days, we will walk in the name of the Lord our God forever and ever. What that means is that we're going to be arm in arm, all of us, and that some peoples are going to be praying in Arabic, and some people are going to be praying in Hebrew, and some people are going to be praying in English, but we're going to be arm in arm. So at the end of days, no one's going to dominate anybody else. There's not going to be just one big idea that everybody's going to abide by. There maybe will be a sense of oneness. The goal is one. But everybody will do it side by side in their own way. What a wonderful vision. What an amazing vision. And I always say, if it's good enough for the end of days, it's good enough to start doing it now. So the Messiah doesn't mean something that you wait for. If you have to wait for it, it's not a good idea. It's something that you can operationalize in your own lives. So tonight, they're going to start operationalizing the Messianic times right here at Hillel. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chaim, or Rabbi Seidler-Feller. Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. So the goal of tonight is to talk about healing the cultural and political divides that separate us here in America. There's no doubt that we've made a lot of progress, but there's no doubt also that there's a lot of divisions that exist. We're talking about abortion, about homosexuality, all the things that make up the culture wars. We have our culture warriors, we have our cultural, the subjects of the culture wars, and they provide for a lot of titillation for us to watch on cable news. We see Rush Limbaugh, we see Rachel Maddow, and then something like what happened 2 days ago in America happens. The murder of George Tilley, the abortion doctor, shot dead at point-blank range in the head while he was praying in church by an abortion foe. And you realize maybe this isn't just about titillation, and maybe these are life and death issues, and maybe we still have a lot of work to do. So I'm honored to hear from you two about what we can do to work on healing these divides. And I want to start right in with a question, if that's okay with you. I know that in both of your work, you talk about finding the language to heal these divides. And I think we all remember the president's speech at Notre Dame a few days ago where he talked about finding common ground. But especially in an issue like the abortion debate, which I think animates so much of the culture war, how do you find common ground when you either kill the baby or you don't?
Eric?
Thank you so much, Cory, for being considerate of my time constraints here.
Yes, yeah.
And let me thank Hillel for hosting us. Cory and I did go to graduate school together. It was actually one of the first weeks that we were together. He was at the same college I was at Oxford, and I went by his room, and we started talking about social justice and the tradition in the United States of finding common ground around social justice, specifically looking at the talented 10th we were talking about back then, the idea that within the African American community, there were those that needed to be the ambassadors and the leaders within the community to uplift the entire race at the time, as it was called, but also the idea of how through slavery and desegregation, the importance of not bringing people to the middle by compromise, but reshifting where the center is. And for me, I think that's the critical piece about finding common ground, is finding a way to re-articulate where the center is when we think that the center is often about compromise between the right and the left, or one extreme and the other. I have the great joy of representing a city as a nonpartisan elected official, where we don't run. I happen to be a Democrat. I'm a proud Democrat. I was elected by my peers to be the head of the Democratic municipal officials, which in the Democratic National Committee is kind of the lead person for all Democratic local officials in the country. But when I go to city council every day and represent you, we happen to have 13 people who happen to be Democrats and 2 who happen to be Republicans. But we kind of shed that, and there's nobody who has a representative or councilman or woman who doesn't have a voice. I think much of the division in American politics, and even local politics and state politics, is a direct reflection of how little power people feel that they have. The shriller the voice is a reflection often of what power they do not have. I think our recent state election was a reflection of that, where you have people, if they happen to be Republicans in this state, they're not in a majority in the legislature, so their representatives not only don't have a partial voice, they have zero voice. So the one moment for a Republican to have some power in California is to vote something down, is to articulate what we're against. Take the partisan piece out of that and think about Los Angeles for a moment. We are so good at articulating what we are against and the things we want to kill. A project, Hillel, too tall, let's take off, the 3rd, 4th floor. There's a development down the street, I don't want people in affordable housing there. We can get a crowd this big in my district for almost anything as long as we're talking about opposing it. But if we talk about coming together and saying, what do we want Los Angeles to look like 5 years from now? How do we want to come together? We get 2 or 3 people that show up. So the first concept is trying to recast also in America what we say we are for, and we can't begin that conversation. And because I am going to leave here shortly and take my chair with me, because I do have to go by the market and I do want a very strong marriage as well, and appreciate my rabbi giving me that advice. I also think that it's very important for us to get past what we had in many ways in vogue here in Los Angeles. After the riots of 1992, part of finding common ground was this cultural discussion. I'm a person with an Italian last name who's half Jewish and half Mexican, and so we've had to deal with this within my own family. But we used to say after the riots, well, God, if blacks and Koreans could just get together and talk and learn what they eat and how they speak, we'll find common ground. When we were in college, I think that was very much in vogue, kind of civility and learning difference. When in reality, I think tolerance is not enough. It's about finding common projects that you work on together. So that in a district like my own, I walk precincts when I'm not running for re-election too, every month. and I go to new houses where an apartment building I'll go into and see a Thai family living next to an Armenian family, living next to a Mexican family, living next to a black family, living next to a Jewish family. And it's nice to be able to have a potluck at that apartment. But what people are more interested in is figuring out how to get rid of the graffiti and the crime and the traffic on their street. So if you can bring people together and as a byproduct they learn about each other's cultures and differences, great. But the common project of finding common ground is really trying to build something around common struggle. Now, that didn't answer on abortion one way or the other. So I'll leave that for Cory. No, just kidding. I'll end with something on abortion, which is I think with an issue like abortion, I think our president actually showed a decent way forward, which is that it isn't just as something as extreme as abortion where you say you're either a baby killer or you're anti-choice. Either you want to enslave women or you want to kill babies. There are those on the issue that will go to those extremes. But if we don't, as leaders, begin to engage first to say we're going to put those aside, and everybody who wants to have a discussion around a common outcome of reducing, for instance, abortions, which is something everybody wants. One of the most touching things was after this doctor was killed, I went onto the Daily Kos, which is a website that has a lot of diaries of people, and there's somebody who gave a very personal diary who lived in Kansas and knew this doctor, and talked about the generations of families that this doctor had touched, including the number of families that he had helped take pregnancies to full term and then adopt out. And I think for a whole host of people who are pro-life in this country, they would have seen that doctor just as somebody who's performing abortions. Whereas that story about this is somebody who actually helped birth babies and bring life into this world and helped the adoptions occur for people who wanted that option was the beginning of an opening of common ground that got shut down because the discourse doesn't happen usually here. It happens on Fox television or it happens on CNN. It isn't just for the right, where people want that battle, where Cheney and Obama giving speeches on the same day are seen as a prize fight rather than a discussion about our civil liberties and our national security.
That's very true.
Thank you, Eric.
I'll see you all later. I wasn't kidding. Oh, nice to see you.
He ducks out after the easy question.
Well, Eric believes in heterosexual marriage and wants to preserve it. So he's going to try to save his. Yes. Eric.
But on behalf of all the people who live here in Los Angeles, Eric is doing such an outstanding job as our city council president. And Eric, as you know, my father lives here in Los Angeles. He's just getting up to say hello. My father's always telling me what an amazing job Eric is doing, so I get firsthand reports. Thank you very much. Okay, God bless. Okay, Mayor Booker.
First of all, it's really great to be here, and I'm grateful for a lot of folks turning out. I have some friends in the audience, as well as some people who found out about this because I tweeted it out. I'll get my language ready. Eric was very eloquent, and I know he's already left the building, but the great thing about politics, that for me, it was a profession I never wanted to go into, and I had this judgment about politicians in general, and I engaged in something I don't think Americans really should engage in, but a cynicism about politics. But now that I've gotten older and know a lot of my friends who've gone into it, when you know somebody like Eric, who I did go to school with, and see how authentic his spirit is, how he really is a guy that lives his values, he really is an inspiration to me. And the beauty of this nation now, as I see it from my generation, which is different than my father's, is you have people who could be in Oakland, California, who could be in, as I know Eric Johnson, who's the mayor of Sacramento, leaders in Los Angeles and Detroit, where there's a relationship you have now with people that really is self-supporting. And Eric has been a dear friend of mine for a long time, and I just wanted to, in his absence as he walked out, I wanted to express that. I don't want tonight to be too much agreement, because I don't want to just say things that everybody's going to be together with, and I don't want it to become a mutual admiration society, so I'm going to insult Shmuley as much as I can.
Good. I'm used to it.
But look, I'm going to say things because I take them from my perspective. I know that's not in vogue for Supreme Court justices to bring their own perspective into their observations, but I'm going to do it. So I live in a world where that is a city of phenomenal accomplishment, great neighborhoods, good people, but we also have tremendous challenges. And so I often listen to a national debate go on that's interesting to watch and challenging, but it really has no relation to what's going on every day and the challenges that I see in my community. And so I watch traditional left-right debates go on that we are so frozen into, and we don't have even a vocabulary often to avoid them. So let me, before I get into abortion, let me just take gun control, for example. So I remember when in Washington, D.C., a lot of my friends who were on my side of the political aisle, on the left, were thinking, oh, this is the worst thing that can ever happen, that the Supreme Court just voted to overturn a law in Washington, D.C. that said they could ban handguns. And a lot of my friends thought this is terrible, it's the Second Amendment, we're gonna now have people going out and buying guns and killing each other. And I watched sort of the same commentary as you said on MSNBC, on Fox, on so on and so forth. And people fell very conveniently into our battle camps when we deal with issues like that. But around America, there were a lot of mayors that looked at the facts. Not one murder in my city in the last 3 years that I've been mayor, not one was done with somebody that went to a gun retailer and actually bought a gun legally and came out and then killed somebody. What I saw was that the whole national debate was missing the reality and the urgencies of the moment. That on the East Coast of the United States, what happens is people go into gun stores and violate laws and acquire guns illegally or take advantage of these wide loopholes that most gun owners think should be closed. And we've polled now, and I'll give you an example of the law in a second, 90% of gun owners think that these loopholes should be closed. They load up their trunks with illegal weapons and they drive them up the East Coast of America. They stop in Washington, D.C. They stop in Philadelphia. They stop in Camden and Newark and New York and New Haven, Connecticut, delivering guns. And so while the country is stuck in this debate that people can say is a legitimate debate, did the founders of the Constitution, when they put forth the Second Amendment, were they talking about groups and militias having the right to guns, or were they talking about individuals? Do we have too many weapons? These are legitimate debates to have, but they don't get to the point of where we're solving real problems that most of us, if we said, okay, you marked out that turf, you marked out that turf, now let's figure out how to solve the problem that most of us would make a lot more progress on. So in the United States of America today, we have laws that don't make sense. The ATF could go into a gun retailer shop and shut them down for not doing background checks. And many times it happens. But there's something called the fire sale loophole, that now that I've been shut down for not doing background checks and I can no longer do business, I can take in my entire inventory and sell it to whomever I want without doing background checks. It's called the this loophole that literally they sell to nefarious forces that take them up. We are in America now have people that are banned from flying and put on no-fly lists because they're suspected of nefarious intentions.
He's not kidding. Believe me, I get strip searched every time I go to the airport.
Yes, yes.
It's the beard, believe me.
Yes. But that same person that we suspect of wanting to do terrorist acts who can't get on an airplane could actually go into a gun retailer and buy a trunk full of weapons. So there's so many laws I can point out to you right now that most American gun owners actually agree should be changed, but that is not the area of discussion. We're too busy taking it to the extremes and marking out legitimate disagreements in constitutional law, which are urgencies to raise to a high level of life or death decisions, but it obscures what's going to make real change in America. Now, I have no illusions that in my lifetime we're going to settle the abortion debate. We really do know that some of the differences we have are irreconcilable. But I do not see the same urgency. We could save the lives, if you want to lose that language, of unborn children. That we all taking actions on the left, on the right, on the anti-abortion, on the pro-choice, if we could come together around the larger goal of reducing the number of abortions in America, we could be making so much more progress than right now. My problem with our country, and I can go to a lot of different examples of this, from gun control to prison overcrowding to criminal justice. We are too busy talking about left or right and not going forward. And that's what I'm interested in. I had a long conversation with somebody at lunch about saying, I am not red, I'm not blue. We need to start talking about purple progress in this country, about all of us coming together and making actual measurable changes.
You know, Newark Airport is one of the largest in the New York metropolitan area. I'm glad that Cory has put me on some sort of blacklist. So no wonder they're always making me trouble. I want to apologize to two people who were going to give short introductions. Arash Farron is the chairman of our committee here in Los Angeles for This World, the Values Network, who staged this event. We do a lot of great events. We will do it at the end. I just wanted to accommodate Councilman Garcetti. And we have one other person who I don't even know. Nice to meet you. So you'll speak as well. Please forgive us. Okay. The reason we're doing this special event is that Cory and I, 18 years ago, Cory as a young African-American Rhodes Scholar, I as a Hasidic rabbi who had been sent by the Lubavitch Rebbe to serve as the rabbi in residence to the students of the university, created this remarkable friendship. And it has lasted 18 years. And it's a unique friendship. Cory continues to be a regular guest at my Shabbos table.
Can we just, let me, I'm sorry. This is going to go on a lot because Shmuley and I love each other, but we can't stand each other. But let me just tell the story for a second. And this is actually worth telling. I had a date. I was my first week in Oxford. And something extraordinary happened. It didn't happen at Stanford, but a woman asked me out on a date. And I'm sure UCLA has the same problems about dating. And I was at Oxford, and I was so excited. And the last minute, I get this note from this woman that says, meet me at the Oxford, and I couldn't pronounce the word. I thought it was L'Chaim. What's L'Chaim? The L'Chaim Society. And actually, I asked people, nobody knew what the L'Chaim Society is. And finally, somebody looks at me and says, Cory, that's the word, it's L'Chaim. And I'm like, is there something caught in your throat? And they said, no, that's how you pronounce the word, L'Chaim. And so they give me directions. I navigate these back room alleys in Oxford, and I get to this building. I go inside, go upstairs, and I see a sign saying L'Chaim Society, Chaim Society. And there was all this noise and everything in the background. So behind the door, I knocked, nobody answered, and I knocked, nobody answered. So finally, I just opened the door. And I'm not joking, it looked to me when I opened the door and walked in like a scene from a movie my mom had taken me to see when I was younger called Yentl. And there were men with black hats and beards, and there were strings hanging out of people's pockets. I didn't know if you pulled one of those strings, what would unravel? I said, you know, the tailors must be horrible. What's up with this? And so this very orthodox-looking woman comes over to me and says, are you Cory Booker? And I was sort of shocked that she knew my name. Because when I walked in, first of all, everybody froze. And it was like one of those old E.F. Hutton commercials, if you all remember that. And I could swear everybody there was thinking, what is this large black man doing here? And I was thinking to myself, what is this large black man doing here? And so this woman breaks the silence by walking over and saying, are you Cory Booker? And I said, yeah, I am. And she said, well, the young lady who was supposed to meet you tonight couldn't make it. And I was like, it's just like Stanford. And I said, oh, thank you very much. And I literally turned to leave as quickly as possible. And this is one really important point, because we all profess tolerance and that we want to be differences, but we all avoid uncomfortable situations all the time. And we all profess to be a pluralistic society. But, you know, Martin Luther King used to always say that one of the most segregated days of the week is Sunday when people go to worship. So I was this liberal, open guy, really was uncomfortable and did not seek out being in environments that were so different than myself. So I turned to leave. And here this young lady said to me, really asked me a question that changed my life. She said, wait, stop, would you like to join us? And I thought of White Lies, and as popular as you might think I am, I don't double and triple book my Friday nights back in Oxford. And I said, okay. And she sat me down to a guy in every way that couldn't be more different than me overtly. I was black, he was white, I'm 6'3", he's 5 foot and a smidgen. I'm very handsome, and he is, he's covered with hair, and I can't tell. But I'll never forget, we were I was stiff as a board. I'm sitting there at what I didn't know was a Shabbat table, and it was the most joyous day on the Jewish calendar. At that point, I didn't know the words. If you had said to them, it was Simchas Torah, which is a celebration of the completion of the Torah. And I sat down next to this man, and he starts talking, trying to engage me and talk to me. And I'll never forget the first conversation, and this is why we titled the lecture this way, was my idol at that point in my life, one of my idols, was a guy named James Baldwin, probably one of the greatest American authors there ever was. And he said, he asked me what I wanted to do, and at that point I was aspiring to give social commentary, to write, and I thought the power of the pen was really extraordinary. And he said, well, what have you written about? And I used to write columns for the Stanford newspaper before I came over, and I told him I wrote about this idea of tolerance, that it was a repugnant state of mind, that really we're a people that say if you're tolerating somebody, you're really just stomaching their right to be different. And if they disappear off the face of the earth, you're no better or no worse off because you were just tolerating them. And I said that this is kind of a bad way to look at it. If you think to the reality of life is that we are so much more interdependent than we even understand, that actually we need each other, and that we need to move beyond tolerance and recognize that mutual interdependency and move to love. And that concept is a very important concept. It's not a weak word, it's not a being word, it's an active word and necessitates a commitment. So when I said that, he sort of looked at me like I was strange. He's like, oh my gosh, I wrote an article saying the same thing. And before you knew it, the tension was taken away from that I was feeling. And he and I just started talking. And I'll never forget, he teaches me my first Hebrew ever because he offers me a drink. Now, Simchas Torah is a joyous holiday. I've learned that the Jews have a reason to fast every other day. But this is a joyous holiday, and he puts down a bottle of vodka and says, you must drink. Now, I confess that Abraham Lincoln has this wonderful saying which says, I've long since come to realize a man with few vices has few virtues. I promise you I'm a virtuous man, but I have never drank in my life. And I told him that, and I said, Rabbi, with no disrespect, sir, I think you've had enough to drink for the two of us. and before you knew it, I was a guy who had never been to a Shabbat table, never been to a Jewish celebration, been to a couple bar mitzvahs when I was a kid, but next thing you know, I'm dancing around with a Torah, wearing a kippah, until he tells me if I drop the Torah, I'll have to fast and stuff like that, so I handed the Torah off. But this is the important thing for me, the lessons really happen afterwards. Because I leave on a high, but the next day, literally, I sit down with other Jews, as well as some friends of mine that were non-Jewish. And one of the Jewish friends of mine castigated me for going to hang out with these crazy Lubavitchers and saying these are right-wing wackos, and these are the things they believe. And I remember being struck by it, and I didn't know, frankly, I'm 22 years old, I didn't know that much about the Arab-Israeli situation, I didn't know that much about Judaism, and I thought to myself, well, I'll just chalk it up to I had a great Friday night. But then I said, you know what, all this talk we did about understanding, I'm going to go back and confront the rabbi. And so I walked back in.
The rabbi was still drunk.
Yeah, he was hungover at that point. And I confronted him and I said, look, I was told you believe all of these things. I can't tell you I even understand some of the issues. And I remember he got up, walked past me, closed the door, he sat down, and we ended up having what was like a 2 or 3 hour conversation about issues ranging from Black Jewish history to Arab-Israeli situations to matters of faith. And at the end of the conversation, I remembered a story by Malcolm X, when Malcolm X was on a commuter train during the heat of the 60s. And Alex Haley tells this story. And a white businessman in a nice conservative suit comes up to Malcolm X and walks over to where he's sitting, looks down on Malcolm X and says, Mr. X, I don't agree with everything you say, but I have to tell you this. I respect you and I like your style. And Malcolm X is said to have stood up very slowly, walks over to the man, looks him in his eye, and then reaches out his hand and says, you know something, you can search the world 2 times over, and you're never going to find 2 people who agree on everything. And he shook his hand. So that began a friendship, and we made a deal that day. It was probably one of the most valuable decisions I've ever made in my life, and it opened me up to learn about Hinduism, to learn about Buddhism, to deeper study other faiths and religions. It literally inspired me to travel the globe. That we said that we would exchange books. I would give him some of the best books from my faith. He would give me some of the best books from his faith. And suddenly I started reading about Hillel. I thought it was the name of a building at Stanford. He gave me books, the first book by Elie Wiesel that I had ever read. And I started giving him books by James Baldwin, by books about Martin Luther King, like Parting the Waters. And the more we exchanged books, the more both of our lives came alive. And I started coming back on Friday nights, bringing non-Jewish friends of mine, bringing Jewish friends of mine. They're like, you're going to a Chabad house? I got to go see this. And before you knew it, I was bringing legions of people on Friday nights to hang out, as we found that we didn't agree on everything, but we had a commonality of spirit. And I learned something about love, and it's a word that's bandied about, and I think it's been weakened in language. But love is such an important active verb that necessitates, first and foremost, a willingness to understand, go beyond your comfort zone and engage somebody in a productive way. Now, we are a nation that's founded like no other, and I'm sorry to go on like this, but it's the last point I'll make. We're a nation founded like no other. We are a nation that's not founded because we all look alike. were not founded because we all speak the same language or pray to the same God. We actually were a pretty significant experiment in the history of humanity. We are the oldest constitutional democracy that was formed around a set of ideals. Now, these ideals, I think, were perfect, but they were even encapsulated in a very imperfect manner. Native Americans in our Declaration of Independence are referred to as savages. Women aren't referred to at all in our founding documents as if they don't exist. Blacks, Stokely Carmichael used to say constitute. I can only say three-fifths of the word because that's all African Americans were referred to in the Constitution. But the reality is, the story of America is sharing these common values and ideals that we as a country in every generation we're willing to do extraordinary things to try to make our democracy richer and more inclusive by having and deepening this conception of what does it mean to live in a pluralistic society, to try to manifest love, and try to make true on the hallmark of this country, which are three Latin utterances, e pluribus unum. So this is going to be the choice of America when we deal with these culture wars, as we call them. Issues from gay marriage to issues of abortion, to even those thorny ones that I don't know, and I can't tell you tonight that we have. But the question is are we willing to engage in that constructive dialogue that has a foundation of love? And that has been what's kept my friendship with Shmuley such a strong thing, that we're always working to try to maintain those issues of love. He and I have some incredible different disagreements. When he started writing his books about sex, and I realized that all the stories I had told him from my early days were being written about now in his books, thinly veiling the names. I have a friend named Cornelius, who is an elected official in Newark, Delaware. We disagree, but the fact that we're willing to engage in a way, we always find a way where we can find ways to move forward. So that's the background of the story. That I don't think that I think our friendship, Shmuley, is important, but it really started in a way that I frankly would never have met you if it wasn't that this young woman stood me up on a Friday night.
Now I got to go back and read Shmuley's sex book. Shmuley, when you talk, I just wanted you to address that point a little bit, which is the bond that you made, that connection you made, the engagement that Mayor Booker is talking about. How do you replicate that on a national scale? What's the obstacle to replicating that?
Well, Cory just shared how two people who saw initially that they were very different discovered not only they had a lot in common, but they had so much to learn from each other. And Cory just said that we're a democracy. We are a republic founded on a set of ideals. And I think that all of these wars that we're now seeing, these cultural wars, these political wars, they come down to the basic abrogation of those American principles. We all tolerate each other. We stomach each other. But really, we know that there's black communities and there's white communities, and the twain don't always meet. We know that the Jewish community continues to be extremely insular, and for good reason. The Jews have not always had the most pleasant experience reaching out. But I got to tell you, when I was about 14 years old, I studied this metaphor that was offered by Rabbi Shner Zalman of Liadi, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe. And he says that a bird has two wings. There's a right wing and there's a left wing. And if those wings both existed on one side of its body, if they were both right wings or both left wings, that bird would do nothing but flop around on its back. It specifically, get this, the antithetical propulsion that comes when each pushes in the opposite direction. That if joined unto a larger body, unto a larger ideal, in this case the bird, it will soar, it will fly. In other words, do we really want a country where everybody's Republican? Do we really want a country where everybody's a Democrat?
I love the honesty tonight. That's what we need.
That's it. That was my point. I'm done. Could you imagine a world where everybody was female? It would be insufferable. And now that I've alienated half the audience, and can you imagine Can you imagine if it were all male? It would be even more insufferable. Let alone that we'd all be dead. Studies show that when we men don't have a woman to balance us, we literally, one of the leading causes of deaths for single men is that they walk into buses. Often your wife will say to you, hey, look out for the bus. Or they have heart attacks because their wives don't give them their medication.
You are not medicated tonight, obviously.
So we really need difference. and applying that and certainly it's true in the black and Jewish communities. I couldn't believe there was tension in the black and Jewish communities. We're not communities united by mutual suffering. What we have in common is not that we were both the world's perennial victims. We are united by a vision of a spiritual future. No man brought the Hebrew Bible to life more than a black man in the United States called Martin Luther King. He took the words of the prophets and he made people march. Some rabbis use those same words and put people into a deep, irreversible coma. And yet, there was tension between the black and Jewish communities as if we didn't need each other. But as it applies to something like abortion, I mean, think about this. I've always said I couldn't believe there's even tension on abortion. Yes, Catholics, for the most part, and some others, evangelical Christians, will define conception as life. By the way, Judaism doesn't. Let's make that point. But I don't want to go too deeply into that. But surely people on the extreme left, especially many of my female friends who are ardent and strong feminists, and people on the extreme right who believe that part of the religious message is that women ought to be respected, and women are not walking sexual objects, and they're not created by God simply for the satiation of the male hormonal need, surely they could have agreed that one of the biggest issues of abortion is simple respect for women, because 99% of abortions are single women getting pregnant by men who often leave them, who often abandon them, or men who often want to be physically intimate with a woman. And they forget that, you know, that physical intimacy is supposed to really connote a deeper emotional intimacy. We could have met on the issue of women's rights, but instead we use these issues like abortion, especially gay marriage. God, I'm driving all around California, and all I see is in churches and in even Presbyterian churches are saying gays are our brothers, they should be allowed to marry. Then you go to some of the more right-wing churches and they're saying that gays are destroying the institution of marriage. I just wrote a piece for Rob in the Jewish Journal that said that when Miss California got up and said, look, I'm opposed to gay marriage, and that's her right, she can express her opinion. And later she said that she was persecuted for expressing that opinion. But let's just remember, Miss California was later, you know, we discovered that she didn't always pose in the most modest way, and then she accepted payment from a beauty pageant for breast implants. And I ask you, is that consistent with Christian values? What would Jesus have to say about that? The number one, marriage isn't being destroyed by gays. If you're opposed to gay marriage, be opposed to it. On biblical terms, on religious terms, I can discuss that with you. But don't say that gays are destroying heterosexual marriage. We straight men and women, we've done a pretty good job destroying marriage ourselves, thank you very much. We didn't need the help of gays. And I am an ear to wives who write these long letters to me. Every day I get hundreds of them unsolicited. And the wives say to me, do you know what it's like to go to a gym and be in shape and put on makeup and then lie down next to your husband naked in bed at night and he doesn't even touch you? And then he goes to his computer and you know he's downloading porn. And do you think for one moment what the wife is thinking? Well, my husband's not erotically attracted to me and we have no sex life, but thank God those gays can't marry. That's done wonders for my marriage. Pornography is a far more insidious problem, and Miss California was complicit in that. Now, I'm not here to judge her, but she sure as heck seems to be casting a lot of judgment.
So when I was 21, talking to Shmuley was great because all conversations would ultimately end up with sex. But now as 40, I would actually rather talk about other subjects.
I wanted you to answer that question a little
Please.
bit, Mayor. Specifically, and by the way, Shmuley, all Jews know that life begins after graduate school. Specifically, what do you see as specific obstacles to developing that kind of understanding, not just tolerance, going beyond tolerance? What are the actual institutional, ideological obstacles to that in this country right now?
Look, I think the largest obstacles in America are in the spiritual realm, and I'm tired of people who preach in the church and act outside of the church a different way. You know, St. Francis used to always say, "Everywhere I go, I preach the gospel, but only sometimes do I use words." So, but I can talk about that, and this is what frustrates me is I can talk about and condemn cynicism, condemn people who thump their Bibles but don't actually live their values. But I'm in a different position. I'm a mayor of a city, and there are urgencies abound around me. And the best way that I have found to create bonds between people is to join people together in a mutual effort to achieve a common goal. It's something I learned from sports. We had black folks on the Stanford football team, white folks on the Stanford football team, Catholics, Jews, Muslims, and the like. But we created bonds, not because we said, let's get the black people and the Jewish people down to have a conversation, but because we worked together on common ground towards a common goal, and we began to understand each other, love each other because of that mutual effort and mutual action. So let me give you a specific example of what I'm talking about in my city. So, in Newark, we had an unacceptably high murder rate. And anybody would condemn that. I don't care if you're Jewish, Muslim, Christian, or what have you. And it's very hard, and I even tried it once, to even just get people together to pray together about the problems. But where we made the most headway of creating sort of mutual bonds was when we said, let's actually work together in common tasks to reduce violence. I'll never forget that we were able to expand our clergy patrols in Newark some 4 or 5-fold. One night I was driving home as mayor, and there was a homeless person in the middle of one of our main arteries, and I jumped out. I was tired to walk over to the homeless person. A police car pulls up, and out of the car jumps a Muslim clergyman and a Christian clergyman, and they come up to me, Mayor, we got this, and they went and dealt with the problem. I just think that we as Americans need to recognize something so very important, that we all who are here today, we drink deeply from wells that we did not dig, wells of freedom and justice. We have inherited a legacy of struggle and sacrifice, that people did things that we will never be called to do. We'll never be called to storm beaches in Normandy or Midway, to bleed the soil or the beach red. We'll never be called to register people to vote when just by registering somebody to vote, you end up in a swamp someplace. We'll never be called to get on a freedom ride, even though your bus will be bombed. We'll never be called to stand up and say that sweatshops should end and we should organize unions, knowing that there'll be people with billy clubs coming to split open our skulls. So we will never be called to show and evidence that same level of courage. But the question is can we join together with the people that are different than us in order to still advance the cause of our democracy, and the urgencies abound. So in the city of Newark, New Jersey, again, I look at these wonderful national debates, which are really nice, but I'm more important to look at the urgencies right now that are going on. So I have decided that in my job as mayor, I'm going to try to get allies everywhere. And I was criticized for this in Newark. I remember when I first started going to talk to people in the Manhattan Institute. I tell you, liberal friends of mine and traditional Democratic people were, why are you talking to those Republicans, yada, yada, yada. Well, the reality is they had something to offer to the issues I'm dealing with. And now in my city hall, I have a right-leaning think tank that's partnering with me to reduce the prison population by creating real avenues for men and women coming home from prison to get something done, because they too believe, and they may have a different analysis of it. It may be because of the heinous cost, the waste of government dollars and warehousing people or they might talk about it in a free market perspective, that we want to liberate the economic potential of these folks so they can be more productive and add to the common good. But whatever it is, there's things that we could do together. So in my work as mayor, meeting the urgencies of the moment, we're finding ways to bring people together who were before wouldn't sit down together, couldn't even have a dialogue together without degenerating into our traditional debates. But now they're all willing to pick up a tool and start working towards a common end. And that's something that to me is so critical.
So let me just add something. I remember that years ago in Oxford, Cory called me up and he said to me, I remember this story. He said to me, there's a Palestinian student who I wanted her to come to your home, but she's reluctant to. Remember this?
Yes.
A woman from the West Bank.
Yes.
And I think in the end, from what I remember, she wouldn't come to my home, but she would meet me at that ice cream shop. Is that right? You had us meet at the ice cream shop on, you love ice cream.
Yes, I do.
And I remember that Cory insisted that I sit with this young woman, and she came with a lot of anger. And she sat down and she said, your people have destroyed my home. I think if I'm not mistaken, I think even a member of her family died in some of the conflicts with the Palestinians and the Israeli army. And that was and I know Cory was trying very hard, again, beyond tolerance. How do you just not stomach each other? Okay, you both have a right to be in the University of Oxford. How do you actually, this is the world's longest standing conflict right now. And I remember feeling very challenged at that point. And I said to her, but we're not there, right? We're not in Israel right now, and you're not in Gaza, and I'm not in Jerusalem. And if we got there, perhaps we would be on the opposite sides of fences, throwing things at each other. But we're here, and you're part of such a glorious religion. The Muslims took the Jews in when we were kicked out of Catholic Spain and Catholic Portugal. in 1492 from Spain, 1503 from Portugal. The Muslims took us in. We went to Istanbul. Our peoples weren't always fighting. And you know, in these days when I meet like Islamic, very often I'm driven by Islamic taxi drivers in New York City, and I see immediately that they're Islamic. And the first thing I say to them is, you know, I want to just tell you how much I appreciate the fact that you publicly celebrate your religion. I do the same, and the more that we do it, the more acceptable it is. And it immediately takes some of the sting out. But Cory, like even when we were going to do this program of speakers in Newark, you brought an imam. I mean, you're at the forefront bringing together these many religious groups. How do you do that in a place like Newark, where there's such deep-seated paranoia and fear? And
Look, so when I became a city council, it's a story I told in some graduation speeches this year. When I became a city council person, I felt really impotent, like I couldn't get the problems done. I was outvoted all the time, 8-1. And I ended up trying something very sort of radical. I decided that in response to this amazing woman who was a tenant president of these high-rises in Newark, where there was a lot of violence one summer, I decided that I would pitch a tent there and go on a hunger strike. And so I ended up doing a fast that lasted about 10 days, maybe inspired by the many fasts I saw you go through, Shmuley, which obviously are not working quite well.
Wait, what are you talking about? This is pure muscle. Yeah. You know, Cory may have a six-pack. I have a mono-pack.
You have a keg. So I remember, so I pitched the tent, and what was amazing to me is I made the statement that this was the United States of America. And how can we as Americans tolerate such levels of injustice within our midst, where people are afraid to even go out to a corner store? And there's so much injustice in our country that we've, in many ways, lost our sense of outrage to. And I set up a tent, and I got very angry with the news cameras, who I accused of only showing up when somebody got shot, and for ignoring the truth that so many of the people in this community were living. And I challenged them to interview folks. And I sat under this tent. And what was amazing to me was, once the news cameras aired, suddenly I started seeing people that would never occupy the same physical space by choice come to this 2 acres of pavement in front of these buildings and suddenly start working together. So there were Newark clergy that started coming out from different denominations and always work together, to offering to pray with me and to fast with me. There were correctional officers from a local lockup, prison guards, that came out to take posts and stand with me. As the days went on during this hunger strike, I was blown away by the human beings that showed up from different areas. We had a suburban mayor from a town near Newark come down, a white mayor with his police officers, to come and stand with us and work with us. Hospitals, conservative business people. One guy from New York saw what was going on and sent a whole bunch of pizzas out to where we were sitting, because there were so many people now working on different projects there. That the gesture was really nice. It ticked me off because I was on a hunger strike. But it was this amazing experience where people came together to meet the urgencies of the moment despite their differences, and through that, I think we came together and created bonds that there were. Now those urgencies exist today. At the end of that, I'll never forget, we all held hands for a final prayer, and there were believers and non-believers praying. There were rabbis, imams, ministers. It was amazing to me that people started praying. And I remember all the different languages that were prayed were there, all these different voices. You know, there's a song during the high holidays that Shmuley taught me the Hebrew for, and it's Ki Beiti Beit Tefillah L'Chol Choamim. May my house be a house of prayer for many nations. Now, it's amazing that to me is the highest calling, that we actually all live in one house, though we have many nations, many languages. But the key for us in America, I think, is to create a context where we all can start working together on the things that we actually believe in. Golda Meir had this wonderful saying, Shmuley, that you taught me, that she said, Jews together are strong, but Jews with other people are invincible. And for me now, you know, again, hearkening back to James Baldwin, who wrote this amazing book called The Fire Next Time, that I think should be required reading for Americans. And if you don't want to read the whole book, just go to the last couple of pages, because he wrote a very difficult book telling the truth of our difficult differences. He talked about the racial divisions. He talked about the Muslim movement in America. A very painful, poignant book. But at the end of it, he took some criticism from some black nationalists because they accused the end of the book being sort of Pollyannish. And he writes in the end, and I'll paraphrase and not quote directly, but he says, in the end of it, he goes, hey, I know what I'm asking you, as he challenged people. He goes, I know what I'm asking you is impossible, but in today's day and age, the impossible is the least we can demand. And he says, for one is, after all, emboldened by the spectacle of human history in general, and Negro history in particular, for it testifies to nothing less than the perpetual achievement of the impossible. And he said, if we, and by we I mean the truly conscious blacks and the truly conscious whites, come together as lovers and insist upon or demand the consciousness of us all, we can then change our world and end this madness. And if not, we're destined to recreate the Bible prophecy made real in the Negro spiritual, God gave Noah the rainbow sign, no more water, the fire next time. So I actually think that we in America are every day at a crossroads where we have a choice, that we could continue to live as we are, or we could recognize that we have a common destiny. As King said from the Birmingham jail, that we're all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a common garment of destiny. The more we are a state that is divided against ourselves, the more we're going to live the same story over and over again. But the more we can create true coalitions across the most savage divides, where I could stand up with a right-wing, moral majority person and sit down and find a common ground, as you and I have, with guys like Mark Gerson, who's a dear friend of ours, who wrote 2 books on neoconservative thought before he even went to law school, but yet find common ground where we can get together and work on education issues, work on economic justice issues. If we can't come up to the edge of the divide and say, you are so different than me, I disagree with you, I disagree with you, I disagree with you. But at the same time, we are within an American context where you and I both can agree that this is wrong, and this is wrong, and this is wrong. And I'm willing to put away those agreements to deal with these issues. If we don't do this, though, the challenges for our nation to keep falling behind in a global context is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger.
Okay, but Cory, how do we take, this is one of the main questions, I think, how do we take that kind of ideology? Whenever I hear Cory speak, and I've heard him give many speeches, what is so unique about Cory is that he really believes in this very idealistic path. I think, you go through life, you become a little bit more cynical, and we're very cynical about politicians. And people come and they hear, oh, you're going to hear the mayor of Newark. If you come to one of Cory's fundraisers, and you think you're going to hear a politician who is a politician, and suddenly you hear this very idealistic young man who has this vision that he believes in. Let's translate it into the practical.
But I resist what you're saying, because I don't think that we have a choice in America.
That was a compliment, by the way.
But he actually was saying very practical things.
No, I agree. Yeah. What I'm trying to say is this. Cory inspires so many people. And then they walk away, and it's almost, if they don't get another dose of that inspiration, they're not going to hold on to that vision, because they go back to a reality of America being really a group of disparate groups that don't really communicate. So, for example, one of the reasons we had the special friendship, really, and Eric Garcetti was part of it as well, is that we left our comfort zones. We were shoved into this small university town in the middle of England. And it happened to be, because it's a well-known university, it attracts students from all over the world. And now, I think so often, Cory, people define themselves not in terms of the positive aspects of their particular group or their unique gift. They define themselves as not being part of the other. So for example, many Jews define themselves as not being part of the non-Jewish world. In fact, Spinoza and one of the greatest philosophers of all time, who the Jews ended up excommunicating, and Jean-Paul Sartre both said that if anti-Semitism ended, the Jews would disappear. If the Jews did not have some group who hated them and told them, you can't marry us, the Jews would disappear. And the fact is, we have a 50% intermarriage rate. So a lot of people think that maybe Spinoza and Sartre were correct. In other words, a lot of people define themselves as being distinct from the other. In Oxford, we didn't have we couldn't do that, because we became one community. When you became the president of our L'chaim Society, there were several African-American students who were upset and said that you should be contributing your time to an African-American
organization. I think you just dropped a bomb on them. Yes, I was the head of a Chabad house.
Yes, yeah. And conversely, when we had Cory as our president, there were many Jewish students who came to me and said, this really should be a Jewish student leader. This had never happened before.
We had co-president that was Jewish.
Right.
Yes.
But the rest of the story is that Mayor Cory Booker would not only go on to become one of the great African-American leaders, so clearly his first devotion was to his community, his people, and he has made everyone proud, but he also became one of the leading exponents of Jewish ideas, even though he wasn't Jewish.
My question relates to, could you explain to me in the audience the thought behind living where you lived in Newark and making the conscious decision to do that, living in the housing project, sleeping in the tent, going on the hunger fast. Just for a background, I grew up in a similar neighborhood in Richmond City and had a hunger strike, but it wasn't on purpose.
You should have gone to the Chabad house in your neighborhood. You got some free Friday night dinners.
I also lived in a tent, but not on purpose as well. But if you could explain to us why you did that, it'd be great. Because I'm not going back.
Okay. You know, a lot of it is just personal decisions. Look, I grew up with parents who fought a lot of fights, literally had to get a white couple to pose as them to move into the neighborhood I grew up in because they weren't showing blacks houses in those neighborhoods. And so I grew up as my parents, my father used to jokingly call us 4 raisins in a tub of vanilla ice cream, and had a very, very privileged background compared to that of my father, who grew up, he was born to a single mother, born poor in a segregated environment. But my parents wanted my brother and I to understand that we were part of the story I talked about before, that we had to continue to fight to make this country real. You know, Langston Hughes, who says, "America never was America to me, but I swear this oath, America will be." My parents wanted my brother and I to be agents of change in this evolving democracy. So when I was a law student, I wanted to move into a community in which I could be of service and which I could be a part of something larger than myself. And fate would have it, I moved into this neighborhood in Newark that on the face of it, people might say, there's so many challenges and so many problems, but the reality is, you know, as my parents would tell me every graduation, and my grandparents, I would hear the same things over and over again. And one of the things they would always say is, never forget you can learn more from a woman from the community or on the 5th floor of the projects than you can from one of these fancy schools that you're going to. And so I moved into a neighborhood where there is such wisdom, such strength of spirit, and such American courage that happened to be across the street from some high-rise projects. I met Americans that to this day are some of the people I idealize the most and look up to the most. And I'll never forget, one of them was a woman from the 5th floor of Brick Towers. And she was the first person to really challenge me. And again, life is an interesting thing, and I think most people aren't aware, open enough to recognize the divinity around them, that don't see the miracles and the miraculous nature of it. And that's just my perspective on the world. There's a wonderful Hebrew phrase, Gamza Latova, which means there's no accidents in this world. Everything happens for a purpose. And so I meet this woman who challenges me immediately on this idea of vision. And I told her, I was this arrogant young law student, and said, hey, I'm here to make a change. I'm going to make a difference. Help me. I'm going to help you. And she said, well, if you want to help me, tell me what you see around you. And I described what you might have said, projects, crack house, et cetera. And she says, you can never help me. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And she goes, the world you see outside of you, Cory, is a reflection of what you have inside of you. And if you see only problems and darkness and despair, that's all there's ever going to be. But if you're one of those people who sees hope and opportunity, promise, and even the face of God, then you can be one of those people that makes a change. So I may have gone to Yale Law School and got my JD, but I got my PhD in the streets of Newark, and from leaders like this. And I sat in my last year of law school at this woman's kitchen table, and I saw Americans like I had never seen them before. I saw groups of African-American women who would pitch in their limited dollars to get someone help someone stay in their rent. Or they would hold parties and events in a dank basement for kids, whether it was Valentine's Day or the best parties, whether it was Thanksgiving or St. Patrick's Day, and there wasn't an Irish person within a long way around that neighborhood. So I made a commitment when we started organizing, and I became a community organizer and lawyer in that neighborhood. When I got into politics, I'll never forget what Ms. Michonne said to me. She said, you know, you get into politics, and Lincoln has this wonderful quote. He says, if you want to see the true character of a man, don't view him in adversity, give him power. And many times I think people get into positions, and we've seen it with some real tragedies. You know, I think I knew Kwame Kilpatrick. He's a really great guy. Something happened to him, I think, when he got into that office and he made some bad decisions. So she said, I don't want you to leave this community. I want you to stay right here. And so I made her a promise. I said, I will only stay here, but I'll move from across the street and I will move into brick towers and live in these buildings with you, and I will stay in them until we solve the building's problems. And I thought that might have been like a year commitment, 2-year commitment. It took us 8 years of living in these high rises until we finally were able to find justice for the residents, and eventually we're going to be building some new towers. I'm sorry for the long answer to the short question.
Wow. Hey,
let me just add, but isn't that one of the major problems in our country, that we no longer salute and highlight the everyday heroes? That we all seem so obsessed with all the people who we see on the front page of People magazine. You know, when I heard that Susan Boyle has now checked into an institution because of the price we pay for fame, and yet all of us are prepared to follow that path off the precipice, off a cliff. I so often hear Mayor Booker speaking about the everyday heroes that he meets. And, you know, Cory was a Rhodes Scholar. And even at Oxford, he always found the students who were perhaps getting slightly less attention. There was one college at Oxford called Mansfield College. It was mature students. And most of the 19, 20-year-old students were praying that Mansfield would not be one of Oxford's 35 colleges. What were these people in their 40s and 50s doing there? But Cory befriended them.
But you make it sound like it's some kind of charity, Shmuley.
It's not charity at all.
As if every person doesn't have incredible value, incredible worth, as if you yourself don't get some benefit from when you open yourself up to people just because they might be different. Let's go to another question.
Fareed Kanani.
Hi, thank you. Earlier on, you spoke on the country's challenges on economic injustice.
I'll translate for him. In Farsi, yes.
So the last few years, we've seen an increased erosion of capital values centered around greed, selfishness, and single power prosperity that has trickled down from the capital markets into politics and further into the everyday home. Do you see a renaissance given our new federal leadership? And who do you think specifically will be at the forefront of this change, obviously other than yourself?
So he gave some commentary on that. There's this, we've seen how greed has corrupted a lot of our systems, from capitalism to politics and what have you. And he asks, do I see a change that's going to lead us out of that?
Right. Well, we're seeing that at the federal level, but obviously that could be a facade that will never kind of transgress down to the state and local levels.
Shmuley, you want to answer? I know you talk about that a lot.
Well, I'm publishing a book on greed this coming week. Isn't it amazing that all of us can agree that our economy was not brought down through some economic downturn, but rather was caused by our greed? We all identify the cause, but no one has spoken of the remedy. Greed is not a financial crisis, it's a spiritual crisis. Greed results from a spiritual emptiness. When you have nothing on the inside, you compensate with too much on the outside. And we need to confront that spiritual crisis. I think we have to accept that money is not a currency by which we purchase self-esteem. That so long as we continue to define our essential human value by what we do and not by who we are, then that our insecurity will only be fostered because we'll just we'll be treading water. The United States is in desperate need of a spiritual renaissance. We know communism doesn't work. It leads to a broken economy and it leads to tyranny. And America isn't a socialist country. Even President Obama has repudiated that. We're a capitalist country. But soulless capitalism, where the belief that the more you have, the more you are, that's corrupting. We have to believe that there's something inside us, impervious of a price tag, which is of infinite value. And whether it comes from religion or whether it comes subservience to a higher cause, I would like to see us recapture that. It comes back to this idea of heroes again, of highlighting people who lead selfless lives, and not just the celebrities in our midst, and not just the Wall Street and investment bankers. I mean, I'm sure Cory will remember, when we were at Oxford, the number of students who wanted to go into banking because of all the zeros that it would put in your bank account at a very early age. And that's great. I have friends who are hedge fund managers who do a lot of philanthropy. But if you forget that money is a means to an end, and if you forget you're supposed to live to work and not work to live, then you are no different from an ox who's born to the plow. And then you can't really have happiness in life. I'm always perplexed by this and confounded by this incredible paradox at the heart of the American experience, which is, on the one hand, we have the highest standard of living in the world, and we have the world's greatest economy. So great that we can spend $1 trillion, and we haven't even felt it yet. and yet we consume 3/4 of the Earth's antidepressants. 1 out of 3 American women is on an antidepressant. What we've learned is that materialism and money does not bring happiness. We've learned it in the most literal sense. And
so I just want to say one thing about that. So look, I'm very much a pragmatist, and there's all of these issues that we're debating, and I can give commentary about greed and the financial systems, but I really like to just look at myself and my own habits. And because really, if you want to take Gandhi's advice, you need to embody the changes you want to see in the world. And then I look at the world around me. So we are definitely have powerful cultural streams that have eroded the bedrock, I think, of some of the best American values. Consumerism, hedonism, narcissism. So I always try to say, well, let me first take a look at my life and what am I doing? Whether it's how much I'm consuming, what I'm buying, where is it coming from, and try to change my habits, because especially as you profess to be a leader, and frankly we're all leaders, what you do is going to have an impact. And then I start looking at my city and what can we do to start building the kind of habits and strength that actually are going to start making a real difference. So we decided that this idea that we are a society that spends more than we save, that buys things needlessly, that we were going to start trying to create a menu of financial empowerment tools in our city that were going to practically help people. So we've done everything from creating a financial empowerment one-stop center in Newark, one of the few of its kind in the nation, where anybody can go. And we have programs there like financial savings match programs, which if you commit to regular savings towards a college education, towards buying a home, towards starting a business, we'll match your savings from $2 for every $1 you save up to $9,000 if you save $4,500. Just programs like that that get people into the habits of savings. We pulled all of our banks together recently and challenged them that we're not creating a climate where many of our residents can even bank because of high minimum balances, because of hidden charges. And we're about to start this major campaign in Newark called Bank on Newark, where we get our banks to lower the minimum balances, create products that are accessible, because my city wastes millions of dollars every year in using check cashing services or instant refunds where you pay high interest rates. So everything that we talk about often, there's a public policy or a project or a program where you can do things. I'll give you my last example. When I was watching the presidential debates, and I heard something that everybody would pound their chest and say the same thing. It was during Father's Day, and you had everybody coming out and saying, fathers should take care of their children. They bring these children into the world, they should take care of their children. Well, who the heck is not going to agree with that? But the question is what are we doing to empower people to make those, to have that outcome to have happen? So examine your own life. Are you mentoring a young person? Are you caring for somebody? Because I know I'm here because of people that weren't my parents or weren't my family, whether it was coaches or the mother on the block that seemed to look after everybody. And then we tried to create public policy in Newark that was going to reinforce that. So we realized, and the last example I'll give is that children of incarcerated adults were the most likely children to go to prison. And we took an examination of those fathers coming out of prison. Why did they not get involved with their children's lives? And we pulled them all together and we created in Newark a special program it's like a fraternity. We call it a fraternity, Delta Alpha Delta Sigma, called DADS, where we have the guys come together and create almost a support group or fraternal organization that celebrates that value of getting involved in the lives of their children. But more than that, we equip them to do that because it's some shame. You have child support arrears that have gone up. You're even afraid to face the mother of your child. So we help them get skills from clothing to marketable skills so they can get jobs. We help them work on their relationships with their kids by actually talking about parenthood, because I hate to tell you this, we have men in this country being born without a man modeling fatherhood in their lives. So they're not necessarily knowing how to do that. And so what we've seen in Newark now that we've modeled this program over a number of years is the recidivism rate of the men coming out of prison has dropped to the floor. It's one of the best programs we have to cut recidivism in Newark. The employment rate has gone through the roof as these guys are getting jobs and holding jobs. And then most importantly, suddenly you have fathers directly involved, celebrating, enjoying it, rejoicing in their relationships, what they have with their children. So this is the issue I said before, and I'll shut up, is, again, anything that we preach about or that we sit back on our couches and watch TV and say, yeah, I condemn that, or I don't believe in that. We should first shine the mirror on ourselves and saying, if I don't like what I see, what could I be doing in my own church, in my synagogue, in my life to begin to make a practical impact on this, even if I only affect 2 people. In Judaism, it's if you save 1 life, you've saved the universe, right?
You definitely have 3 rabbis here tonight. Okay. I wanted to follow, what I'm really getting from what you're saying is, over the course of this evening, is that your way to heal these divides is very action-oriented, very project-oriented,
yes,
common work. I know you're a friend of the president's. What advice would you give him if he could do one thing in his administration, action-oriented, project-oriented, to heal these divides? What would you tell him to do?
So the only thing I'll say is I saw 2 women with their hands up. All these men over here have been asking these questions. Okay. But look, the reason why I went way out of my way and very early to help President Obama is because when I met him, and I meet a lot of politicians, I found that he had a peace at his core and an authenticity about him. And I didn't agree with everything Obama was about, or believed in many things I do, obviously. But what I love the fact is that we were going to have a president in the White House who really seemed to live his values. There's an old saying that says, who you are speaks so loudly, I can't hear what you say. And by having somebody that every day gets up and lives a life as consistent as possible with their values, it's called integrity. And we all have slips in integrity, trust me, I have them all the time. But a guy that's just going to be a good person, to me, that's really powerful. So when I have a chance to see Obama, which isn't often, I'm not like his friends where he calls me up to play basketball, he's afraid of my jumper. I just want Obama to be Obama, as I want Boteach to be Boteach. And let me give you the last example of this, of what I mean. So imagine 2 years at Oxford. I've had a journey that I never imagined, that I would be this black Christian head of a Chabad house, that I would be hanging out on Friday nights, not with potential dates, but with Shmuley, Boteach, a hairy rabbi. And this beautiful,
sexiest guy around.
This is one of the most beautiful moments of my life, honestly. It was a very touching moment at the end of one of our last big events. I think it was like a Purim party. And there was 3 men left standing. There was a rabbi who has the alcohol tolerance of a water buffalo. There was the grandson of the prophet of the Mormon church, Ezra Benson's grandson, Michael Benson, who was a member of the L'chaim Society at Oxford, and is still a close friend of Shmuley's of mine. Shmuley visits him. He's now the president of a Mormon college in
Southern Utah University.
Okay, so he's up because Mormons don't drink. And then there's this teetotaling black Christian. And the 3 of us are sitting in seats just like
I was drinking for the 2 of them.
Yes, and yourself, and a few other people that couldn't show up that night. And so this amazing moment with this Mormon starts choking up and turns to Shmuley and says to him, he goes, Rabbi, I just need to tell you something. That seeing that you are so grounded and rooted in who you are, that you're unapologetically yourself, that you're proud of your heritage and your history, and that you live your values of your faith. I want you to know that you have made me a better Mormon. And I was sort of surprised to hear that. And Shmuley then turns to him, slurring his words a little bit, and says, Michael, says, seeing you be a living exponent of the highest ideals of your faith, by living that consistently and embracing me as your brother, you've made me a better Jew. And I turned to these 2 guys who I'd hung out with for every Friday night and said, fellas, being with you every single Friday night, you guys have done nothing for my love life. So, I've come to this realization that we are in this weird place in America where everybody wants us to be a post-racial society or a race-transcending society. I don't want any part of that. I want America to have rich Italian culture, rich Korean culture, rich Indian culture, rich Jewish culture, because I want to revel in it and celebrate it. It's the delicious diversity of our nation. But I also want us to come to a point where we recognize that within each other. And so part of the thing that gives you confidence to reach out is, first, that word I keep bandying about love, is you got to love yourself and be grounded in who you are and confident in who you are, and that gives you an ability finally to embrace your brother. So I want Jews to be Jewish, and he's heard me go before Jewish audiences, challenging Jews to be Jewish as you define it. What's their values? I want black folks to be black. What does that mean? I want a Supreme Court justice not to be apologetic. I'm not a racist. I'm a New Yorican who grew up in the projects, and just like Samuel Alito, who in his testimony before he became a Supreme Court justice says, I'm an immigrant, Italian immigrant, and that has helped shape and mold me who we are. and to recognize all of that under a larger context, that we are all part of a human family and we share common ideals, be they American ideals or humanistic ideals.
Yeah, I mean, this concept of going beyond tolerance has many metaphors. David Dinkins used that of the American quilt. You know, but the Bible has a very beautiful metaphor. It says that each and every one of us is a tree in the field, the book of Deuteronomy. And a tree has its roots deeply, found very deeply in its own soil. And it drinks from the nutrients of its soil. But notice it's not a potato and it's not a turnip. It doesn't remain insular. It doesn't remain only in its soil. It grows out into the garden. It oxygenates the earth. And if you walk into a garden that's only of one color, it really is, it's nowhere near as electrifying as seeing those varied colors. I mean, difference is something that really is so stimulating and fascinating, and you discover your identity by seeing your reflection in someone else. Cory just told the story of me and Mike and him, but there's another story that I've never told before. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's chief aide right now is a young man named Ron Dermer. He's 38 years old. He was also a student at Oxford. He did his DPhil in international relations. He was also a subsequent president of the L'Chaim Society. Now get this. He's the chief advisor to a right-wing Israeli prime minister. And Ron, indeed, was a Republican in his 20s who helped to write the contract with America. But every Friday night for Shabbat dinner, he used to bring some of the leading Islamic students from the university, from some of the top Arab families in the world, to our dinner. And when some of them would come, they would drink the wine, which they shouldn't do in Islamic law, because you're not supposed to drink alcohol. We Jews drink enough for them as well. And I have to tell you that after like 2 years, a lot of these students stopped drinking the wine, and they said that we became more Islamic. We embraced our faith as a result of watching you Jews celebrate your tradition. And that's an amazing thing. And Ron has those connections. I was just reminding him of this when I saw him at the AIPAC convention. Till today, he has those. So it's an amazing thing to come together with people.
But you two are kind of gliding over the real problem in the culture war. It's not that I want to be, you know, that I could be the best Jew I could be, or you could be the best Black American you could be. It's that there's people in this country who want me to be the best them that I could be.
Right.
How do you deal with them?
You know,
And then we're going to take one more question.
Right, and so one of the young ladies I would strongly suggest that we do. So my point is that there's immovable forces that I'm not going to waste too much of my time.
Okay.
If they've decided to stay rooted where they are, I'm not going to try to put force on them and get an equal and opposite force away. I'm instead just going to try to be me and challenge them, hopefully through the way I live my life, to move a little bit more in the direction of love.
Let me just say that I slightly disagree with that. So Cory and I will have our first disagreement of the evening. I actually think that we have to remind people of the glorious nature of their own tradition so that they want to be more of them and that they exhibit more of the authenticity of their tradition. For example, when I speak to Islamic students and when I speak to Islamic groups, and I do all over the United States, I remind them of the glorious history of Islam. Do you know that we would not know who Aristotle, Plato, Socrates were? They would have been forgotten to history if not for the Islamic scholars who kept this tradition alive in medieval Spain, because the Catholic Church decided these were pagan philosophers and their books were quashed. We only know about Greek philosophy because of the earliest Islamic universities. We know Maimonides loved Islam, praised Islam. It was Christians who often persecuted him and persecuted Jews subsequently. Today, of course, evangelical Christians are the best friends that Israel has. So the ground has shifted somewhat. But I actually believe that we're capable of reminding people of the glorious nature of their own tradition. And the same thing is true even in the Jewish community. Jewish insularity is not something that I've ever embraced. I think many Jews are still profoundly suspicious of the non-Jewish world. I, as a rabbi, encounter a lot of suspicion about my own activities, and this is a This World event tonight, and Arash helped organize it with all of our committee here in Los Angeles. We're profoundly grateful. But I got to tell you, the Jewish community is supposed to be a light unto the nations. We have to be reminded of what our gift is as well. We weren't supposed to be an insular people who cut themselves off. And I know that we're not supposed to assimilate either. I get it. I'm a Jew who stands for Jewish identity. But I feel impoverished when I'm only around Jewish company. I have to tell you a story about Cory very quickly. Cory spoke at the main AIPAC convention in Chicago, Illinois, a few months back. It's the AIPAC summit for all their biggest contributors. And he gave what was honestly a masterful oration on 3 of the earliest parshios of the Bible reading. It was right after Simchas Torah. We were starting the cycle of reading from Genesis. And he spoke about the evolution of man. And he used the examples of Adam, Noah, Abraham. and the gradual evolution of their social responsibilities. It was a masterful speech. When it was over, one of the leading AIPAC officers in the country, someone who has devoted their life to AIPAC, their wife walked over to me and said to me, Shmuley, I'm going to start learning the Parsha of the week every Friday. I'm going to find a rabbi. Can you recommend someone in my city? I said, sure, but that's amazing. Why? And by the way, this woman comes from a rabbinical family, and she just is not as observant as some of her relatives. She said, when I heard an African-American Baptist, a Christian, so admire and cherish the Jewish tradition, without being a Jew himself, Cory's a Christian, it reminded me of who I am. So I think we are able to also show other people what their gifts are, even though we may not be part of that tradition.
Okay, we need to let a woman speak.
Pamela. Pamela? Is there a Pamela Kolachi? Oh, there you go.
First, I wanted to thank you both for coming very much. And Cory, as a Stanford alum, I personally wanted to apologize for how terrible of the dating experience you had there.
It's not too late to fix it.
Why can I never come to a Jewish event without somebody trying to be a yenta? It's terrible.
To be fair, my fellow law school classmates had the same complaint. So, one of the issues tonight seems to be the crucial central definition of assimilation. What is assimilation? How do you define it? Is it political? Is it cultural? Is it, racial? How do we define assimilation? Because to me, growing up, I can tell you, I'm a Persian Jew, and coming from a family that has strong convictions and values, I think has actually helped me become more open-minded and want to assimilate at this day and age where I am in my life versus at a young age. Had I been assimilated into different facets, I don't know if I would be where I am today. So my question to you is, what is assimilation to you? How do you define it? And what do you expect from community in general?
Look, I'm just going to go from, and I'll let Shmuley talk about it from the Jewish faith. Look, the black community has been dealing with a lot of issues, and I remember when Barack Obama ran, when Arthur Davis ran, when I ran against Sharp James, a lot of these younger blacks were coming up and had sort of the black folks that they were running against, in these cases happened to be traditional African Americans who were very much a part of the civil rights movement. Bobby Rush that Obama ran against first, Earl Hilliard that Arthur Davis ran against, I ran against Sharp James. And a big issue started swirling around because we were all told that we weren't black enough, and these issues of racial authenticity started to come out, that there's a certain way to be black, there's a certain way to manifest. So this is, when you ask a question like that to me as a black person, it takes me fully into this racial question that I think a lot of Americans think about, especially of our generation, which is a younger generation, where there is much more plurality in the manifestations of Italian culture, of Latino culture, or the black experience has become so diverse. And so for me as an African American, I really had to define for myself what my value system was, and really be very conscious of that. Now, Shmuley can say something else, and I leave it to him, but I think that blacks, Jews, others often feel a lot of different pressures to be something, and there's also a lot of judgment. You're not Jewish enough. You're not black enough. But I think that has to be an internal dialogue where you codify, and it's always evolving, conceptions of your race, conceptions of your gender, identity, or whatever. But I think it's so important that, as Shakespeare said, to thine own self be true, that you start to try to live your essence and live the truth of who you are and define it for yourself, and don't let the world try to tell you. I experienced the same thing Barack Obama did. I had some people telling me I wasn't black enough. I had some people telling me I was too black. I was just comfortable being Cory Booker, frankly, and how I defined that. And so I challenge anybody in this room not to let someone else define you, but to find you within yourself, and don't shrink from it. So this is why, for me, I think the stories Shmuley's telling are great. I'm not going to sit here and be the rabbi, and I think Shmuley should be, and say that every Jew needs to define their Judaism in X, Y, and Z way. But what bothers me is that often we who are African Americans or Jews or whatever faith you are really don't take the time to fully engage your own faith or your own race in a way to discover the beauty and the richness of it, and don't understand the gravity of it. Carter G. Woodson, who wrote this wonderful book called The Miseducation of the Negro, said the primary cause of human suffering is forgetfulness. people who have forgotten who they are, where they've come from. And I think that, as Gandhi even said, as he experimented with Christianity, if anybody's read a lot about Gandhi on Christian missionaries, engaging them, he said we're all born in a certain cultural context for a reason, and we should take our time to delve into that and understand it, to really understand the truth of who we are, and then try our best to live that truth every single day.
Yeah, actually, looking at going from the macro to the micro, what I'm discovering today is one of the reasons that people are assimilating, and I don't just mean religiously, I mean culturally. I mean, teenagers assimilate. It's called peer pressure. They erase their individuality to be part of a group. On a micro level, I believe this is happening because so many people today are experiencing not their specialness or their uniqueness, but their ordinariness, especially in times of a recession, especially when we see that so much of the wealth that we have stocked up is slowly being eroded, and so many of the things that defined our specialness are being taken from us. We don't know what to hold on to that will make us feel unique. Notice that Hollywood's having its greatest year ever, and CNN reported that Americans were watching 4 hours of TV 2 years ago. They're now watching 5. We're doing whatever we can to numb this pain, I think, of ordinariness. My friend Marianne Williamson, who's one of my colleagues from Oprah and Friends, the great spiritual teacher who lives here in LA, she always says, honor your incarnation. If you're born a Jew, then you're supposed to drink of those spiritual waters, specifically from the path of Judaism. The same thing is true of a Christian. The same thing is true even in terms of ethnicity, African American. I've always been inspired by the African American tradition, and that's how my friendship with Cory has really enriched me. But if we think that we're ordinary, that my tradition is subpar, or there's nothing to be found in it, then we're going to look elsewhere. There's a very beautiful teaching, which I will conclude with, in the Jewish religion, that says, Book of Deuteronomy again, Ki lo davar reik hu mikem. Moses is lecturing the Jewish people on the last day of his life, and he says to them, the Torah is not something empty from you, which is, it's an awkward syntax. So the Talmud renders it as follows, V'im reiku, if it feels empty, just know mikem. Know that emptiness comes from you. I have used this with hundreds of couples who've told me that they're in an empty and lonely marriage, that it can't be salvaged. And I've tried to remind them, just stop blaming your spouse. You can divorce if you want, but just know, the emptiness comes from you. And you can resuscitate it and reinvigorate it if you so choose. Same thing is true with Jews who have found a certain boredom in their tradition. You know, I find myself whenever I speak with Cory, and all of you who heard tonight why Cory is such an inspirational figure, but I want to pay him this unique compliment, that ever since I've known him, and I met him when I was 24 years old and Cory was 22, ever since I've known him, and I'm a glass half empty kind of guy. I had a turbulent childhood. My father lives here in Los Angeles. My father's one of my great heroes. He's here this evening. My father, an immigrant to the United States, had to work very hard for everything that he had. My parents' marriage did not survive. So I'm someone who sees life through the lens of struggle. Cory has always somehow reminded me that if I'm just myself, I will be special. And I don't have to try so hard. And I think that's why so many Americans are relating to his message. Because we all just want to be special, and we want to know that there's something unique about us, and we want to know that our country is special, and we don't want to see just the negativity. You know, once I was walking home, I went to pick up Cory for Shabbat dinner at Queens College. Yes, please.
So we'll end, the moderator will
Do you remember the story?
I remember this very well. It's one of my favorite Shmuley stories. Because to me, if there's any theme I can leave on with this idea of moving beyond tolerance, it really isn't about the other and their problem, that whether it's a person that's fiercely anti-abortion, it's really not about them. This is always about you, and what do you take away? And you know, tonight I've learned something. Actually, I love that honor your incarnation. Every moment is an opportunity to learn. It's a gift. But this is one of my favorite stories about Shmuley because
that's all you learned from me tonight.
It wasn't from you, it was Marianne Williamson.
True.
You shouldn't have given her credit.
Then I can teach you the Jewish thing that you're never allowed to quote something without saying the source.
Really? Because I thought you told me that good speakers borrow, great speakers steal.
No, I said great speakers rip off. That's a different thing.
So this will be the final lesson. And I have to say, I tease Shmuley, we go back and forth, but he really has been, through my friendship with him, I won't say he's been one of my great teachers in life, I'm teasing you, but I've learned a lot about myself, and this was one of my favorite moments. So Shmuley, it was Shabbat, and Shmuley would have to walk from the Chabad house to the L'chaim Society, which was this long stretch down High Street in Oxford. And I used to love watching this because here was this very obvious Jew in a bastion of Christianity. I mean, the colleges in Oxford are named, this is no joke, Corpus Christi, Christ Church. These are names of colleges in Oxford. So here you have this Jew walking down past it. So one day he's walking this long road down High Street on a Friday. It's dark and late, as he always is. And there is this guy, a Rastafarian, who sees Shmuley walking, and he runs over and calls, "Hey, you!" He's obviously been having a lot of fun, and he's kind of drunk, and he says, "Hey, you, come over here." And Shmuley's in a hurry. He's like, he stops, he walks over, he goes, "You're Jewish, right?" And Shmuley goes, "Yes." He goes, "Oh, I'm so happy to see you today. It's my birthday, and I'm Jewish too." And Rastafarians, and I didn't know this till you told me the story, that Rastafarians believe that they're a lost tribe of one of the lost tribes, yes?
Yes.
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 So he goes, "I'm Jewish too." And he says to him, "But I need to know something. Why don't you believe in Jesus Christ?" and Shmuley's like, "Well, I'm a Jew." and he goes through a very quick theological explanation. And he goes, No. I don't understand. What if God came down and told you that Jesus Christ is the Son of God? Would you then believe in Jesus Christ? And Shmuley goes, "Well, if God came down and told me that Jesus Christ was the Son, I would say, 'You're wrong, God.'" and so this guy who said his name was Slim and goes through another couple tries, and Shmuley just is resistant and says, "I don't believe in Jesus Christ." And finally, Slim is angry as anything and bursts into anger, starts screaming at him and saying, "You're no Jew. You're not a Jew." And he turns around and starts storming away. Now honestly, Shmuley and I, at this point in our friendship, have had a lot of conversations about Shmuley controlling his anger, Shmuley controlling his rage, because Shmuley is...
Rage against the injustice.
Let me put a bookmark on, and I'm going to finish the beautiful end of the story to tell you a terrifying story, which basically Shmuley was on a plane ride during this Oxford, and this is why I told him about this. As he's typing away on his computer, the flight attendant comes by and says, "Please close your computer, sir." And Shmuley goes, "Okay." Keeps typing away. A woman has to come again, says, "Sir, we're landing, please close your computer." He keeps typing third time, he finally closes the computer, puts it away. So now he's going into Heathrow Airport to come back to Oxford, and this man runs up to him and says, angry as anything, "You didn't close your computer when they told you to close your computer. You put all of us in danger. This is why Hitler should have killed all the Jews." And so now, I've experienced bigotry in my life. What would Cory have done? Cory would have looked at that man and said, "I am praying for you," and kept walking along, just ignoring the statement. Shmuley, however, decides to explode in rage and starts screaming, echoing throughout the corridor in Heathrow, "Did you hear what this man said? He said Hitler should kill all the Jews," and starts following this, and British are kind of quiet and reserved, starts screaming, jumping up and down, pointing at this man as he's trying to now hustle with his bags to get to the passport control and get into the nation. And he starts screaming at the passport control officers, "He said Hitler should call all the Jews. You can't let him into this country." And now the passport control people are all nervous, and they pull the man aside in a back room, and Shmuley screaming. So this is Shmuley dealing with conflict. So he gets the applause. I'm praying for the man, and Shmuley's intolerant to his intolerance.
I was in complete control, by the way.
Yeah. So now Slim has just screamed at Shmuley Boteach, and the man starts walking away. And Shmuley stands there for a few minutes, looks over his shoulder back down High Street where he has to go, and he suddenly goes, "Hey, Slim! Slim!" Slim stops and turns around looking angry. The two men look angry at each other for a few moments, and finally Shmuley goes, "Slim! Happy birthday, man. Happy birthday." Slim suddenly just drops his expression, runs over to Shmuley, picks him up in this bear hug, and says, "Thank you, man. Thank you. I love you." Now, Slim was obviously inebriated, intoxicated, high.
It wasn't intoxicated. It was something else.
Yeah. But the thing Shmuley and I talked about that Friday night is a saying from Abraham that the world is a reflecting pool. what the energy you send out, the reflection you send out is reflected back on you. And I really do believe we have a balanced universe. And the more love you can generate into this world, the more love that's going to come back to you. And that would be the final thought for me.
Thank you both very much. Thank you.
Just as one of our organizers are just going to say a word, but I personally want to thank Rob Eshman from the Jewish Journal. And Rob, thank you for letting me and Cory speak tonight. And everyone, please see this as a service of the Jewish Journal, that they allow forums like these, promote forums like these, support forums like these for the benefit of the community. And God bless you, Rob, and everything the Jewish Journal does for this community. I want to personally thank Barry Mattis, who I think just walked out, who always accompanies the mayor all over the United States, and I don't know if she's still here, but God bless you, Barry. And I especially want to thank Mayor Cory Booker for taking from his very, very valuable time to be with us.
Good evening. My name is Shana Sorrentino. On behalf of This World, the Values Network, I would like to thank you all for coming here tonight. Values, tolerance, and ethics. What are they, and how do we as a society relate to them? I hope that this discussion has stimulated each of you in some way to impact you, to leave here this evening questioning the way we as a society and as individuals govern ourselves through ethics and values, and that you leave answering these questions for yourself. I would first like to thank Rabbi Shmuley and Cory Booker for being here tonight, as well as my fellow committee members and everyone else who contributed to the great success of this event.
Since I'm the token Jersey girl in the room, I get the last word. Oh, let me have my moment. The last word, and I'm going to come to the point quickly. Thanks again for everybody for being here. We could not have put on this event without you in the audience, so thank you for taking the time on a busy Tuesday night. Finally, if you'd like to participate in helping us organize future events, please either see me or Arish, or give us your email, and we'll be delighted to have you on the committee. And then last but not least, if anybody's interested in hearing more from Rabbi Shmuley, he will be outside signing some of his books. Thank you so much.